What happens when arrogance meets experience? Buck Blackjack Harlow and his gang are about to learn that even time itself bows to true skill. Stick around to witness a confrontation that will echo through history. Jasper Kane isn't just a 98-year-old veteran, he's the deadliest gunslinger who never misses. The sun hung low over the desert town of Red Rock, its golden rays casting long shadows across the dusty streets. It was the kind of place where time seemed to stand still, where the past lingered like a faint echo in the arid breeze. The town's centerpiece, a weathered saloon with faded lettering reading Red Rock Tavern, stood as a relic of a bygone era. Inside, the atmosphere was subdued but heavy with unspoken tension. Locals nursed their drinks, their conversations hushed as they glanced toward the corner booth. There sat a man who didn't quite fit the picture of frailty his years might suggest. His broad shoulders, though slightly stooped, hinted at a lifetime of hard labor and battle. His face was a map of creases and scars, a testament to the 98 years he had lived, a life as sharp as the Colt .45 revolver strapped to his side. That man was Jasper Kane, a veteran of wars most had only read about in history books, and the most accurate gunslinger Red Rock had ever known. Though his hands bore the tremor of age, they moved with a precision that left no room for error. Locals spoke of him in whispers, stories of legendary accuracy and unshakable resolve traveling far and wide. But to the outside world, Jasper was just another old man enjoying his twilight years in a forgotten corner of the West. That afternoon, the quiet rhythm of Red Rock was shattered by the sound of galloping hooves. A gang of outlaws thundered into town, their laughter coarse and their demeanor exuding arrogance. Led by Buck Blackjack Harlow, a man with a reputation for leaving no witnesses, the bandits dismounted and strode into the saloon as though they owned the place. Jasper didn't look up from his glass of bourbon, his steady hands lifting it with care. But as the bandits' heavy boots stomped across the wooden floor, the air seemed to shift. Locals averted their eyes, some slipping out the door in search of safety. Only Jasper remained unmoved. "Hey, old man!" Blackjack's voice boomed through the saloon, dripping with mockery. "You deaf or just too old to notice when trouble walks in?" Jasper finally looked up, his piercing blue eyes meeting Blackjack's sneer. "I've noticed," he said, his voice gravelly but calm. "Question is, have you?" The tension in the Red Rock Tavern thickened like the smoke wafting from Blackjack's cigar. The gang spread out, their boots creaking against the wooden floorboards, leaving a trail of dust in their wake. Each outlaw wore a smirk, their eyes scanning the room for anyone who dared challenge their dominance. But the townsfolk had long learned that survival often meant staying quiet. Jasper Kane, however, was not one to blend into the background. Though he didn't move from his corner booth, his presence alone seemed to shift the room's balance. It wasn't just his age or the revolver resting lightly in its holster. It was the air of someone who had lived through more chaos than anyone present could imagine. Blackjack took a long drag from his cigar, exhaling a plume of smoke as he sauntered over to Jasper's table. His gang laughed, the sound as sharp and grating as a blade dragged across stone. "Oh, you've got quite the reputation, old-timer," Blackjack sneered, slamming his palm on the table. "They say you're some kind of legend around here, best gunslinger the West's ever seen. That true?" Jasper met Blackjack's gaze with a calm, unwavering stare. "I reckon it depends on who you ask." The gang erupted into laughter, but there was an edge to it, a nervous undertone that betrayed their attempt at bravado. Even Blackjack's smirk faltered for a moment, as though Jasper's calm unnerved him. "See, I got a problem with that," Blackjack said, pulling out a chair and sitting across from Jasper. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "I don't like competition, and I sure don't like stories about some old man who thinks he's still got it." Jasper's hand rested on the table, steady despite the faint tremor of age. His voice was low, but carried the weight of 1,000 battles. "Son, I ain't looking for trouble, but if you're set on finding it, you might not like what you uncover." Blackjack leaned back, letting out a bark of laughter. "You hear that, boys? The old man's threatening me." The gang roared again, though their laughter seemed forced, their eyes darting toward Jasper's calm expression. At the bar, Mary Lou, the tavern's owner, clutched a towel in her hands, her knuckles white as she wiped an already clean glass. She'd seen Jasper in action once, years ago, when a drifter had foolishly tried to rob the place. It had been over in seconds, a single deafening shot, and the drifter's gun had flown from his hand, landing harmlessly on the floor. Since then, Mary Lou had come to regard Jasper not just as a customer, but as the tavern's quiet guardian. "Blackjack, maybe we should leave the old man be," one of the gang members muttered. He was younger than the others, barely out of his teens, and his eyes betrayed a flicker of doubt. Blackjack shot the young man a withering glare. "You scared of a relic like him? He's just another washed-up war hero who doesn't know when to quit." Jasper's lips curled into a faint smile, one that didn't reach his eyes. "You might want to listen to the boy," he said softly. "Sometimes the young ones see clearer than the rest." Blackjack slammed his fist on the table, his face twisting in anger. "Enough of your riddles, old man. Let's see if you're as fast as they say." The tavern fell deathly silent. Mary Lou froze behind the bar, her breath caught in her throat. The locals exchanged anxious glances, some inching toward the exit. Only Jasper remained motionless, his calm demeanor unshaken. Blackjack stood, his hand hovering near the revolver strapped to his hip. "Go ahead, Grandpa. Show me what you've got." Jasper sighed, his hand drifting to his bourbon glass. He took a slow sip, savoring the taste as though he had all the time in the world. When he finally set the glass down, his eyes locked onto Blackjack's with a cold, steely intensity. "Last chance to walk away," Jasper said quietly. His voice carried no malice, only the weight of certainty. Blackjack's smirk returned, but it was less sure now, his bravado slipping. "Draws, old man," he snarled. In the blink of an eye, Jasper moved, his hand blurred toward his revolver, the sound of the hammer cocking echoing through the tavern like a thunderclap. Blackjack's fingers barely brushed his own holster before Jasper's shot rang out, the bullet striking the outlaw's belt buckle with pinpoint accuracy. The impact sent Blackjack's revolver clattering to the floor. The room erupted in gasps. Blackjack stumbled back, clutching his waist where the bullet had torn through the leather. Leaving him unharmed but thoroughly humiliated, Jasper lowered his revolver, his expression unchanged. "I warned you." Blackjack's face flushed with anger and shame, but the glint of fear in his eyes betrayed him. His gang stood frozen, their earlier bravado replaced by stunned silence. The tension in the tavern was palpable, as the locals realized one thing. Jasper Kane wasn't just a legend. He was the reason Red Rock remained standing. The air in the tavern was thick with tension, as if the very walls held their breath. Blackjack staggered back to his gang, his hand trembling as he rubbed the torn leather where Jasper's bullet had struck. His cocky smirk was gone, replaced by a scowl of seething humiliation. The outlaws exchanged uncertain glances, the kind that suggested their leader's aura of invincibility had cracked. "You're lucky I didn't aim higher," Jasper said, his voice calm but laced with a quiet authority that filled the room. "A man like you doesn't deserve a second warning." Blackjack's face turned a deep shade of red. "This ain't over, old man," he spat, slamming his fist against the nearest table. The sound echoed through the silent tavern, but it carried none of the weight it had before. The locals barely flinched now, their gazes fixed on Jasper as if drawing strength from his unshakable calm. One of Blackjack's gang members, a wiry man with a scar running down his cheek, stepped forward, his hand resting on the hilt of a long knife strapped to his side. "Boss, maybe we ought to let this one go," he muttered under his breath. "That shot, it wasn't luck." Blackjack wheeled around, his voice rising in anger. "Are you questioning me, Cutter? You think I'm afraid of some washed-up codger?" Cutter hesitated, his eyes darting toward Jasper, who remained seated, his hand resting casually on the table. There was no bravado in the old man's posture, no need for it. His reputation, and the bullet that had just disarmed Blackjack spoke volumes. "No, boss," Cutter mumbled, stepping back into the shadows with a glare from Blackjack silencing him. "Good," Blackjack snarled. He turned back to Jasper, pointing a finger at him like a judge passing sentence. "Enjoy your little victory, old-timer. We'll see how long you last when we come back." The gang began to retreat, their boots scuffing against the floorboards as they made their way to the door. Mary Lou exhaled a shaky breath, relief washing over her as she set the glass she'd been clutching onto the bar. But Jasper's eyes didn't leave Blackjack's. "You're making a mistake," he said evenly. Blackjack froze mid-step, his hand tightening into a fist. Slowly, he turned back, his face twisted with rage. "The only mistake I made was letting you show me up in front of my boys," he growled. Jasper leaned forward slightly, his calm gaze unrelenting. "You've got choices, son. You walk out that door. You live to see another day. But if you come back looking for trouble, you might not like what you find." The tavern fell silent again, the weight of Jasper's words settling like a heavy fog. Blackjack's gang shuffled nervously, their confidence unraveling as they realized the odds weren't in their favor. "I've heard enough of your sermons, old man," Blackjack hissed. "You'll regret crossing me." He stormed out, his gang trailing behind him like shadows. The door slammed shut, and the faint sound of hooves clattering on the dirt road outside signaled their departure. The room exhaled collectively, the tension lifting slightly as the locals began murmuring among themselves. Mary Lou approached Jasper's table, her face pale but resolute. "Thank you," she said softly. "I don't know what would have happened if you weren't here." Jasper offered a small, tired smile. "Just doing what needs to be done." Frank, the town's blacksmith, stepped forward, his burly frame towering over the other patrons. "Jasper, you think they'll be back?" Jasper's expression grew serious. "Men like Blackjack don't take kindly to losing face. He'll be back, all right, and next time, he'll bring more than just his gang." The room grew quiet again as the implications of Jasper's words sank in. Mary Lou's hands trembled as she poured a drink, spilling some on the bar. "What do we do?" Jasper leaned back in his chair, his fingers tapping lightly against the worn wood of the table. "We prepare." Outside, Blackjack and his gang rode hard down the road, the clatter of hooves kicking up clouds of dust. They didn't stop until they reached the edge of a nearby canyon where their makeshift camp lay hidden among the rocks. Cutter dismounted and approached Blackjack cautiously. "Boss, what's the plan?" Blackjack dismounted his horse, throwing the reins down angrily. "The plan? The plan is to show that old fool he messed with the wrong man. No one embarrasses me like that and gets away with it." "But boss," the younger member, Slim, interjected hesitantly, "you saw him. He's no ordinary old man. That shot, he could have killed you if he wanted." Blackjack rounded on Slim, grabbing him by the collar. "Are you scared of a wrinkled has-been, Slim? He's just a man like any of us, and I'll prove it when I bury him in that dust bowl he calls a town." Slim shrank back, muttering, "Yes, boss." Blackjack released him and turned to Cutter. "Round up the boys. We'll hit that town at dawn, and this time we're bringing the whole crew." Cutter nodded, though the apprehension in his eyes lingered. He couldn't shake the image of Jasper's calm gaze, the way he disarmed Blackjack with surgical precision, but loyalty, or fear, kept him silent. As the gang began preparing for the next day's assault, the moon rose high above the canyon, casting long shadows across the camp. Blackjack's anger burned hotter than the campfire, fueling his determination to reclaim his pride. But what he couldn't see, what none of them could see, was that they were riding straight into the sights of a man who never missed. Back in the quiet town, the dusty streets carried a stillness that belied the storm brewing on the horizon. The townsfolk whispered anxiously in corners, their nervous glances darting toward the saloon where Jasper still sat. Mary Lou had locked the doors for the night, but a few of the locals lingered, drawn to the enigmatic man who had stood firm against Blackjack and his gang. Frank leaned against the bar, arms crossed, his brow furrowed with concern. "Jasper, you've seen more than your fair share of trouble, haven't you?" Jasper chuckled softly, his weathered hands cradling a half-empty glass of bourbon. "You could say that, but there's more to you than just a steady hand with a gun," Frank pressed. "A man doesn't command that kind of respect or fear without a story behind him." The room fell silent as everyone's attention turned to Jasper. He set his glass down and let out a long sigh, his gaze drifting to the flickering lantern light. "I didn't come here to stir up old ghosts," he said, his voice low, "but maybe it's time folks knew why I carry the burden I do." Mary Lou took a seat nearby, her curiosity mirroring the others. "Go on, Jasper. We've all got ghosts." Jasper leaned back in his chair, the lines on his face deepening as memories surfaced. "During the war, I was part of a unit known as the Ghost Company. They sent us where others wouldn't go, missions behind enemy lines, places where survival was a gamble. We weren't just soldiers, we were hunters. Every shot we took, every decision we made, it was calculated to end things before they could escalate." He paused, his green eyes darkening with the weight of his words. "After the war, I tried to leave it all behind. But those skills, that reputation, it follows you no matter how far you run. Folks started calling me the Phantom Sharpshooter, said I was a man who could take the wings off a fly at 100 paces. The room was eerily quiet, every ear straining to catch every word. Even the creak of the floorboard seemed to hold its breath. "But it's not something I'm proud of," Jasper continued, "because every shot came with a price. A piece of your soul gets left behind every time you pull that trigger." Mary Lou's voice was soft when she spoke. "Is that why you came here, to find peace?" Jasper nodded. Thought maybe I could live out my days as a simple farmer, working the land, keeping to myself. But trouble has a way of finding you, no matter where you go. Frank shifted uncomfortably. And now Blackjack's bringing the fight right back to our doorstep. Jasper met his gaze with steady resolve. That's why we don't wait for him to strike. We take the fight to him. The townsfolk exchanged nervous glances, their apprehension clear. You're saying we should go after them? Mary Lou asked, her voice trembling. No, Jasper said firmly. That's my fight. I won't risk anyone else getting hurt because of me. But Jasper, Frank protested, you can't do this alone. Those bandits outnumber you 10 to 1. Jasper's lips curved into a faint, knowing smile. I've faced worse odds. As the discussion unfolded, the sound of hurried footsteps echoed outside. A young boy, no older than 10, burst through the saloon doors, his face pale and breathless. Mr. Jasper, they're coming. I saw 'em at the ridge. They've got more men with them. Panic rippled through the room, but Jasper remained calm, rising slowly to his feet. How far out are they, son? The boy gulped, his small chest heaving. A couple of hours, maybe less. Jasper nodded, his mind already working. Then we've got work to do. He turned to Frank and Mary Lou, his voice steady and commanding. Frank, I need you to gather as many folks as you can and get them to safety. Mary Lou, lock the saloon and don't let anyone in until this is over. What about you? Mary Lou asked, her eyes wide with worry. Jasper stepped toward the door, his gait steady, his silhouette framed by the dim light. I'll do what I do best. Out at Blackjack's camp, the gang was finishing their preparations. Fires crackled, casting long shadows against the canyon walls as they readied their weapons. Blackjack stood at the edge of the group, his eyes scanning the horizon. We'll hit the town hard and fast, he barked. That old man's got guts, but guts don't stop bullets. Cutter approached cautiously, his face tense. Boss, what if he's more than we think? You saw what he did back there. Maybe we should think this through. Blackjack's glare silenced him. We don't think, we act. That's what makes us different. You want to live scared your whole life, or do you want to take what's ours? Cutter hesitated, but eventually nodded, falling back into line. The gang mounted their horses, the sound of hooves echoing through the canyon as they began their ride toward the town. Unbeknownst to them, Jasper was already preparing. At the edge of town, he set up a series of traps, his movements precise and deliberate. He knew every inch of the land, every advantage it offered, and he intended to use it all. Jasper's silhouette stood against the backdrop of the setting sun, his figure a mix of calm purpose and hardened resolve. The townsfolk, though fearful, had followed his instructions to the letter. Mary Lou had locked the saloon, gathering the women and children inside, while Frank coordinated the evacuation to nearby barns and basements outside the line of fire. Jasper, meanwhile, was a flurry of deliberate motion. His old rifle, meticulously maintained despite its age, rested on the workbench near the edge of town. From a hidden chest, he retrieved items he hadn't touched in years: coils of wire, small explosives wrapped in cloth, and steel traps rusted but still functional. What are those? Frank asked, stepping cautiously into Jasper's temporary workshop. Insurance, Jasper replied, without looking up. His hands worked deftly to prepare the traps, the motions as natural as breathing. If they want to bring a fight, I'll give them one they'll never forget. Frank hesitated. You really think you can take on all of them by yourself? Jasper's expression didn't waver. Frank, I don't think. I know. Every move they make, I've already thought 10 steps ahead. These boys are used to scaring people into submission, not fighting someone who's prepared for them. Frank looked down, his doubt clear. You've done enough for us already. We can't just let you do this alone. Jasper paused, glancing up with a faint smile. You've done your part by getting the others to safety. Now let me handle the rest. As night crept in, Jasper moved through the outskirts of town with practiced ease, setting up traps in the places he knew the outlaws would approach. Behind fences, under patches of disturbed dirt, and even near the water troughs, every trap was carefully concealed, each one strategically placed to funnel the bandits into a choke point. His old instincts kicked in as he surveyed the landscape. Keep them guessing, he murmured to himself, recalling the lessons drilled into him during his service. He placed a tripwire near the south road, its taut line hidden beneath the shadow of the low stone wall. Another explosive device was concealed in an old wagon, its trigger connected to the slightest movement of the reins. The final piece of his plan was a perch in the church bell tower. From there, he would have a clear view of the town's main street, a perfect vantage point to pick off targets while staying hidden. Back in the saloon, Mary Lou tried to calm the frightened children huddled near the bar. She offered reassuring words, though her own hands trembled. "He'll keep us safe," she said, her voice soft but determined. "Jasper's not like anyone else. He's special." One of the older children, a boy named Robbie, looked up. "Do you think he'll win?" Mary Lou knelt beside him, brushing his hair back gently. "I don't just think, Robbie, I know." Meanwhile, at the edge of town, Jasper took a moment to rest, sitting on an old stump as he loaded his rifle. The moonlight glinted off its barrel, illuminating the deep scratches and dents, a weapon as seasoned as the man who wielded it. He closed his eyes briefly, recalling faces from his past, comrades lost in battles far from home, their voices echoing in his memory. "You don't fight because you want to," he murmured, his voice low. "You fight because there's no other choice." The sound of hoofbeats broke the stillness of the night. Jasper's eyes snapped open, his body instantly alert. He moved quickly, climbing the ladder to his perch in the bell tower. From there, he could see the approaching gang, a line of shadowy figures on horseback, their torches casting flickering light across the darkened landscape. Blackjack rode at the front, his hulking frame unmistakable even from a distance. Behind him, his men followed in formation, their laughter and crude jokes carrying through the cool night air. "Let's show these cowards what happens when you cross the Blackjack gang," the leader bellowed, his voice echoing ominously. Jasper's lips pressed into a thin line. "You'll regret coming here," he whispered under his breath. As the gang approached the first trap, a seemingly harmless stretch of open road, a sudden explosion rocked the ground beneath them. Horses reared, throwing several riders to the dirt. The men cursed and shouted, their initial bravado replaced by confusion. Blackjack barked orders, his fury evident. "Keep moving, it's just a scare tactic." But as they advanced, another trap sprung. A hidden steel jaw snapped shut around one man's boot, eliciting a blood-curdling scream. The chaos spread like wildfire, the outlaws scrambling to make sense of the carefully laid defenses. From his perch, Jasper watched the scene unfold with grim satisfaction. He adjusted the sights on his rifle, taking aim at one of the gang members attempting to disarm a trap. "Not tonight," he muttered, pulling the trigger. The sharp crack of the rifle echoed through the night, and the man dropped where he stood. The remaining bandits froze, their eyes scanning the darkness for their unseen assailant. The echoes of Jasper's first shot lingered in the cool night air, an unspoken warning to the outlaws. For a brief moment, silence reigned, broken only by the distant whimpering of the injured bandit caught in the trap. The gang, rattled but still determined, regrouped behind Blackjack, who barked orders to restore their shaken confidence. "He's up there somewhere," Blackjack growled, his eyes scanning the town's darkened rooftops. "Fan out! Flush him out! And someone put that fire out before it spreads." The remaining gang members scrambled to obey, though their earlier bravado had been replaced by cautious movements. They stuck to the shadows, their heads swiveling as they anticipated more traps. Every flicker of light, every creak of the wooden planks beneath their boots made them flinch. Jasper, hidden in the church bell tower, watched their movements with the precision of a seasoned predator. He counted their numbers, assessed their weapons, and noted their growing unease. "They're scared," he thought, the corner of his mouth twitching in a faint smirk. "Good. Fear makes people sloppy." Below, one of the younger bandits, a wiry man named Pete, edged toward a low stone wall, his rifle shaking in his hands. "This ain't right, Blackjack," he hissed. "This guy's playing us like a fiddle." Blackjack's response was as cold as it was dismissive. "Then stop whining and play smarter, Pete. Or do you want to end up like Hank over there?" He gestured toward the man caught in the steel trap, his screams now reduced to weak groans as he clutched his bleeding leg. Pete swallowed hard, gripping his rifle tighter. Yeah, sure, boss. Whatever you say." In the bell tower, Jasper adjusted his position, his keen eyes scanning the scene below. He spotted one of the outlaws attempting to disarm a tripwire near the saloon's entrance. The man crouched low, his focus entirely on the task at hand. Jasper steadied his aim, his breathing slow and controlled. "Better luck next time," he muttered before squeezing the trigger. The shot rang out, and the outlaw crumpled to the ground, the tripwire forgotten. The other bandits ducked instinctively, shouting curses into the night. "He's gotta be in the tower," one of them yelled. "Light it up." Two men sprinted toward the church, torches in hand, but before they could reach the base of the tower, another trap sprung, a concealed explosive rigged to a stack of crates. The blast sent them sprawling, their torches extinguished as they hit the ground. Jasper allowed himself a brief moment of satisfaction before shifting his focus. The gang was adapting, moving more cautiously now, but their disarray worked in his favor. He needed to keep them off balance, to ensure they never regained control of the situation. "Boss," one of the men shouted, pointing toward the town's water tower. "We could use that for cover. Draw him out." Blackjack nodded, barking orders for his men to regroup near the structure. As they moved, Jasper tracked their progress, noting the strategic flaw in their plan. The water tower offered cover, yes, but it also funneled them into a tight space, exactly what he needed. He descended the bell tower quickly but silently, his boots landing softly on the wooden rungs. Moving through the shadows like a ghost, he reached the base of the water tower before the gang arrived. Beneath the structure, he planted another device, a small explosive rigged to detonate when triggered by weight. He retreated to a nearby alley, his heart steady, his mind sharp. The gang reached the water tower moments later, their movements frantic as they sought shelter. Blackjack positioned himself at the center, his imposing figure casting a long shadow in the torchlight. "All right, boys," he said, his voice low but commanding. "We've got the upper hand now. He can't take us all out. Spread out," and the explosion cut him off mid-sentence. A deafening blast that shook the ground beneath them. The water tower groaned ominously, its wooden supports splintering under the force. A second later, the entire structure collapsed, sending a tidal wave of water crashing through the street. The outlaws were swept off their feet, their weapons lost in the torrent. Jasper emerged from the shadows, his rifle raised. He moved with purpose, picking off the disoriented bandits one by one. Each shot was precise, each target falling without so much as a cry. Blackjack, drenched and furious, scrambled to his feet, his revolver drawn. He fired wildly into the darkness, his rage blinding him to the futility of his actions. "Come on, you coward," he bellowed. "Face me like a man." Jasper stepped into the open, his rifle slung over his shoulder. His expression was calm, his voice steady. "You should have stayed away from this town, Blackjack." The outlaw leader froze, his bravado faltering as he took in the sight of the man before him. Jasper's calm demeanor, his unwavering gaze, and the rifle in his hands spoke volumes. "I think you've won," Blackjack snarled, raising his revolver. Jasper's reply was simple, his voice carrying the weight of years of experience. "I don't think—" "I know." The air was thick with tension, the cool night punctuated by the faint crackle of fires dying out around the ruined water tower. Blackjack stood his ground, his soaked leather coat clinging to him as his revolver gleamed in the moonlight. Across from him, Jasper, calm and unshaken, held his rifle loosely but with a readiness that promised precision. "You've got guts, old man," Blackjack growled, circling slowly. His eyes flicked toward the shadows, searching for any sign of remaining allies. The gang had been decimated. Some lay scattered in the muck, while others had long since fled, their courage drained by Jasper's methodical dismantling of their group. Jasper didn't move, his boots planted firmly on the ground, his steely gaze never left Blackjack, his silence more intimidating than any words. He didn't need to speak. His presence alone was enough to command the scene. "You're outnumbered, outgunned, and out of luck," Blackjack sneered, raising his revolver. "What's one old-timer gonna do against me?" Jasper tilted his head slightly, his voice low but cutting. "You think I'm the one who's outnumbered?" In a swift motion, Jasper raised his rifle and fired a single shot. Blackjack's hat flew off, the bullet grazing it so closely that the outlaw froze mid-step. His wide eyes betrayed his fear for the first time that night. "That's your only warning," Jasper said, his tone even. "Put the gun down and walk away." Blackjack's lip curled into a snarl, his pride warring with his survival instincts. He tightened his grip on the revolver, aiming it squarely at Jasper's chest. "Not a chance, you stubborn—" Before he could finish, Jasper lunged forward with surprising speed for a man his age. He slammed the butt of his rifle into Blackjack's wrist, sending the revolver clattering to the ground. The outlaw stumbled back, clutching his injured arm, his bravado crumbling as Jasper leveled his rifle at him. "You don't get it, do you?" Jasper said, his voice tinged with both pity and disappointment. "You walked into a quiet town, thinking you'd find easy prey. But you never stop to consider who might be living here, what they've been through. Blackjack, his face twisted in pain and fury, lunged for his fallen revolver. Jasper stepped on the weapon before the outlaw could reach it, pinning it to the ground with the weight of his boot. "It's over," Jasper said firmly. "Don't make me regret giving you a chance to leave." The outlaw's shoulders slumped, and he raised his hands in surrender, but his eyes glinted with defiance. A man cornered and desperate. Jasper could see it clearly. The look of someone who would try to turn the tables the moment he saw an opening. "Why don't you just finish me off?" "Huh," Blackjack spat. "That's what men like you do, isn't it? Kill first, ask questions later." Jasper's grip on his rifle tightened, a flicker of something unreadable crossing his face. Memories of the battlefield, of decisions made under fire, flashed in his mind. He'd taken lives before, but each one weighed on him like a stone in his soul. This man, vile as he was, didn't need to join those memories. "You're not worth it," Jasper said at last, his voice quieter now. "Get out of here and take what's left of your crew with you. Don't come back." Blackjack hesitated, his pride keeping him rooted to the spot, but the realization of his predicament slowly dawned. "You'll regret this," Blackjack muttered, turning to leave. Jasper didn't respond. His rifle trained on the outlaw until he disappeared into the shadows. The aftermath of the standoff left Jasper standing alone in the center of the ruined town square. He lowered his rifle, the tension in his body easing as the adrenaline began to fade. Around him, the townsfolk slowly emerged from their hiding places, their faces etched with a mixture of relief and awe. "Mr. Jasper!" a young boy called out, stepping forward hesitantly. Are they gone for good?" Jasper knelt down to the boy's level, his expression softening. "They won't bother us again," he said gently. "Not as long as we stand together." As the townspeople gathered around, their gratitude poured out in a wave of words and gestures. Jasper nodded humbly, his mind already retreating to the solitude of his farm. Despite their thanks, he couldn't shake the heaviness in his heart, a familiar burden he carried every time he was forced to draw his weapon. Sarah approached him, her face a mix of admiration and concern. "You saved us, Jasper, but you don't have to carry this alone." He met her gaze, his lips curving into a faint, tired smile. "I'll be all right, Sarah. Just make sure the town knows what to do if anyone like them comes back." She nodded, understanding the unspoken meaning behind his words. As Jasper turned to leave, he felt the eyes of the townsfolk on him, their quiet hero. He didn't linger, disappearing into the darkness as the first light of dawn began to break over the horizon. In his wake, the town was left with more than just their safety. They were left with the memory of a man who proved that quiet strength could stand against the loudest chaos. Dawn spilled golden light over the quiet town, its warmth chasing away the lingering shadows of the night's conflict. The streets, now marked with the debris of the standoff, bore the silent testament to the chaos that had unfolded mere hours before. The townsfolk began to emerge cautiously, their footsteps tentative as they assessed the damage. Though their spirits were buoyed by Jasper's intervention, an undercurrent of unease lingered. Inside the town's modest general store, a gathering of locals convened to discuss what had happened. The air buzzed with whispered debates and hushed arguments. Some hailed Jasper as a hero, while others expressed concerns about the consequences of his actions. Would the outlaws truly stay away? Or had they invited even greater danger by standing up to them? "It's not over," Sarah warned, her voice cutting through the din. She stood at the center of the room, her tone resolute. "Men like Blackjack don't just walk away. They regroup. They retaliate." The room fell silent as her words hung in the air. Among the crowd was Sheriff Grady, a man whose grizzled features betrayed years of weathering the storms of small-town law enforcement. He had stayed out of the fray during the night's events, bound by caution and a lack of resources. Now his eyes were fixed on Sarah, his expression grim. "She's right," Grady admitted, his voice low but firm. "We're not equipped to deal with this kind of threat." Jasper might have scared them off for now, but if they come back with reinforcements, he let the implication hang unspoken. Outside, Jasper walked the perimeter of his farm, his steps measured and deliberate. The tranquility of the morning was deceptive, masking the storm he knew was brewing. His sharp instincts told him Blackjack's retreat wasn't a surrender, it was a regrouping. The gang would return, more desperate and dangerous than before. Jasper paused near a weathered fence, his gaze drifting to the horizon. Memories of his military days resurfaced, vivid, and unrelenting. He had seen this pattern before, a defeated enemy licking their wounds only to strike back with renewed ferocity. The thought of innocent lives caught in the crossfire gnawed at him. "It's never over," he muttered to himself, his voice tinged with both weariness and determination. Back in town, Sarah and Sheriff Grady stood on the steps of the general store, observing the uneasy movements of the townsfolk. Grady's voice dropped to a confidential tone. "We need a plan, Sarah. If they come back, we can't rely on Jasper to fight our battles." Sarah's brow furrowed, her resolve unshaken. "Jasper isn't just a fighter, Grady. He's a strategist. He knows what's coming. We need to convince him to help us prepare." Grady nodded reluctantly. "Fine, but getting him to agree won't be easy. The man's been through enough. He might not want to take this on." At that moment, a cloud of dust appeared on the horizon, moving toward the town at a steady pace. A lone rider, dressed in a travel-stained coat, approached. The figure dismounted near the town square, drawing curious glances from those nearby. He was young, with sharp features and a confident air that seemed at odds with his disheveled appearance. The newcomer strode into the general store, his boots leaving faint prints on the dusty wooden floor. He tipped his hat to Sarah and Grady, his eyes scanning the room with keen interest. "Name's Evan," he introduced himself, his voice smooth and self-assured. "Heard there was some trouble here last night. Figured I'd come see if y'all could use a hand." Sarah and Grady exchanged wary glances. "What kind of hand are you offering?" Grady asked, his tone cautious. Evan's lips curved into a knowing smile, the kind that knows how to deal with outlaws. "Let's just say I've got experience in that department." Meanwhile, Jasper was tending to his horses when Sarah arrived at his farm, her determined stride cutting through the morning quiet. Jasper glanced up from his work, his expression unreadable. "You've got company," Sarah said without preamble. "Some young man named Evan says he wants to help with the outlaws." Jasper's brow furrowed, his movements slowing. "Help? Huh. What's his angle?" Sarah shrugged. "Don't know yet, but we need all the help we can get. Blackjack isn't gone, Jasper. He's regrouping. We both know it." Jasper sighed, leaning against the fence post. "I've seen this before, Sarah. People show up offering help, but they're always looking out for themselves first. We can't afford any loose cannons." Sarah stepped closer, her voice firm. "Then talk to him. Find out if he's the real deal. Because, like it or not, this town needs more than just you to stand a chance." Jasper considered her words, his gaze shifting back to the horizon. The tension in his chest was familiar, a mix of duty and dread. He had spent years trying to leave this life behind, but it seemed the fight always found him, and now the stakes were higher than ever. He nodded slowly, his decision made. "All right, let's see what this Evan is made of." The stage was set for a new chapter in the town's struggle, with alliances to be forged and trust to be tested. As the sun climbed higher into the sky, casting long shadows over the quiet streets, the echoes of the previous night lingered, a reminder that the battle was far from over. The afternoon sun painted the small town of Willow Creek in golden hues, casting long shadows across the quiet streets. Inside the general store, the tension was palpable as Evan leaned casually against the counter, his hat tilted back just enough to reveal a confident smirk. Sheriff Grady kept a wary eye on the stranger, while Sarah stood nearby, her arms crossed, silently studying him. Jasper entered the store with slow, deliberate steps, his weathered boots barely making a sound on the wooden floor. His presence shifted the room's energy, the calm authority he carried unmistakable. Evan straightened slightly, his smirk faltering under Jasper's piercing gaze. "So," Jasper began, his voice low and steady, "you say you want to help. Tell me why." Evan met Jasper's gaze, his confidence returning. "I've got my reasons," he said cryptically, before adding, "but mostly, I don't take kindly to outlaws thinking they can push folks around. Heard what happened last night. Figured you could use another set of hands." Jasper's expression remained unreadable. "Outlaws aren't just a nuisance. They're calculated, ruthless, and desperate. You don't walk into a fight like this unless you've got a reason. So I'll ask again, what's yours?" Evan hesitated, the briefest flicker of something, anger, perhaps pain, crossing his face. "Let's just say Blackjack and I have history," he admitted. "A kind that doesn't end well for him." Sarah exchanged a glance with Jasper, her expression skeptical. "History," she pressed. "What kind of history?" Evan leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial tone. "The kind that doesn't leave much room for forgiveness. Blackjack and his gang tore through my hometown a few years back, Took everything from us, my family. His voice trailed off, and he swallowed hard before continuing. I've been tracking them ever since. The room fell silent, the weight of Evan's words sinking in. Jasper studied him for a long moment before nodding slowly. All right, he said. But understand this. If you're here for revenge, you're no use to us. This fight isn't about settling scores. It's about protecting this town. Evan's jaw tightened, but he nodded. Understood. Outside, Sheriff Grady watched the exchange through the window, his mind racing. He had seen men like Evan before, haunted, driven, dangerous. While Evan's help could be invaluable, it could just as easily be a liability. Grady resolved to keep a close eye on him. Meanwhile, Sarah and Jasper discussed preparations. We'll need to fortify the town, Sarah said. Barricades, vantage points, anything to give us an edge if they come back. Jasper nodded, his mind already formulating a plan. And we'll need to train the townsfolk. If they're going to fight, they need to know how. Evan chimed in, his voice confident. I can help with that. I've seen how Blackjack operates. I know how to counter his moves. Jasper's eyes narrowed. Then you'd better prove it. As the sun dipped lower, casting the town in shades of amber and crimson, Jasper, Evan, and a small group of townsfolk gathered near the old churchyard. Jasper demonstrated basic shooting techniques, his calm instructions carrying the weight of experience. Evan watched for a while before stepping forward. Not bad, he said, a hint of a smile on his lips. But if you really want to hit your mark under pressure, you've got to learn to shoot on the move. Without waiting for permission, Evan picked up a rifle and demonstrated, his movements fluid and precise. The crowd murmured in admiration as he hit his target dead center. Jasper nodded, acknowledging Evan's skill. All right, Jasper said. You've got their attention. Let's see if you can teach them. Later that evening, Jasper and Evan found themselves alone by the campfire. The flames danced in the night, their flickering light illuminating the tension between the two men. Jasper broke the silence. You're good, he said. Too good to be just another drifter with a grudge. So what's your real story? Evan stared into the fire for a long moment before speaking. You're right, I'm not just some drifter. I used to ride with a group, not unlike Blackjacks, but we were different. We didn't take from innocent folks. We went after the ones who deserved it. Corrupt businessmen, greedy landowners, men who thought they were untouchable. Jasper raised an eyebrow. And what happened to your group? Evan's expression darkened. We crossed paths with Blackjack, thought we could take him down. We were wrong. The revelation hung in the air, heavy with unspoken pain. Jasper nodded slowly, understanding the weight of Evan's past. If you're here to make amends, Jasper said, you'll have to prove it. Not just to me, but to this town. No second chances. Evan met Jasper's gaze, his voice steady. I'm here to make things right. You have my word. The night deepened, the fire crackling softly as the two men sat in silence, each lost in their thoughts. The stage was set for what lay ahead, alliances forming against the looming storm. Dawn broke over Willow Creek, the pale light casting long shadows across the town. Jasper stood on the edge of the main street, his eyes scanning the horizon. The faint sound of distant hoofbeats carried on the wind, signaling the arrival of trouble. Sheriff Grady joined him, his face pale but resolute. They're coming, Grady said, his voice tight with tension. Just like you said they would. Jasper nodded, his expression unreadable. We don't have much time. Get the townsfolk into position. We've done all we can to prepare. Now it's up to them. Grady hesitated. What about you? Jasper adjusted his hat, the faintest hint of a smile tugging at the corner of his lips. I'll be where I'm needed. In the heart of the town, Evan helped Sarah fortify the last barricade. The townsfolk, armed with rifles and shotguns, crouched behind cover, their faces a mix of fear and determination. Sarah's voice carried above the murmurs. Remember what Jasper said. Stick to your positions, and don't fire until you have a clear shot. Evan stepped forward, his tone firm but encouraging. This is your town, your home. They think they can take it because they've taken everything else. But today, we show them they're wrong. A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd, bolstered by Evan's confidence. Sarah caught his eye, her expression a mix of gratitude and something deeper. You've got a way with words, she said quietly. Evan shrugged, his smirk returning. I've had practice. The hoofbeats grew louder, a rhythmic drumbeat that sent shivers through the air. Blackjack and his gang rode into town like a storm, their black horses kicking up clouds of dust. At least 20 riders fanned out, their faces shadowed by wide-brimmed hats. Blackjack himself led the charge, his cold eyes scanning the town with predatory intent. "Willow Creek!" he bellowed, his voice echoing down the street. "You know why we're here. Hand over your money and we'll leave you in peace. Resist and we'll burn this place to the ground." From behind the barricades, the townsfolk remained silent, their fingers tightening on their triggers. Blackjack smirked, mistaking their quiet resolve for fear. No answer. "Fine. Looks like we'll have to make an example out of you." He raised his hand, signaling his men to advance, but before they could move, a single rifle shot rang out, the sharp crack slicing through the tense air. One of Blackjack's men cried out and tumbled from his horse, clutching his shoulder. The gang froze, their eyes darting around for the source of the shot. Jasper stepped out from the shadows, his rifle held steady in his hands. He walked with calm precision, his boots crunching softly against the dirt road. "That's far enough," Jasper said, his voice carrying across the street. "You've got two choices, turn around and leave, or stay and regret it." Blackjack's smirk faltered, replaced by a sneer. "And who's gonna stop us?" "You." Jasper didn't flinch. "Me and every person in this town. You're not the first group of bullies to come through here. You won't be the last. But I promise you, you'll remember this day for the rest of your life, however short that may be." Evan stepped forward to join Jasper, his pistol drawn. "He's not bluffing, Blackjack, and neither am I." Blackjack's gaze flicked between Jasper and Evan, calculating his odds. The tension crackled like a live wire, each side waiting for the other to make the first move. "Fine," Blackjack growled. "You want a fight? You've got one. Boys, take 'em down." Chaos erupted as the gang surged forward. Gunfire roared through the air, the sharp cracks echoing off the buildings. The townsfolk held their ground, firing from behind cover with newfound confidence. Jasper and Evan moved with lethal precision, their shots finding their marks with unerring accuracy. From her position near the church, Sarah provided cover fire, her aim steady and true. Beside her, Grady barked orders, his voice rising above the din. "Hold the line, don't let them through." Blackjack's men, accustomed to easy victories, found themselves outmatched. Their initial charge faltered under the townsfolk's coordinated defense. One by one, they fell, their bravado replaced by panic. Blackjack himself dismounted, his expression twisted with rage. He locked eyes with Jasper and began to advance, his revolver drawn. "This ends now, old man," he snarled. Jasper met him halfway, his rifle still slung over his shoulder. "Yes, it does," he said calmly. The two men squared off in the middle of the street, the battle raging around them. The townsfolk, sensing the significance of the moment, focused on holding their ground, leaving Jasper and Blackjack to their confrontation. The sun climbed higher, casting harsh shadows across the battlefield. Blood stained the dirt, the cries of the wounded mingling with the sporadic crack of gunfire. Yet amidst the chaos, Jasper and Blackjack faced each other in eerie silence, the weight of their conflict hanging heavy in the air. This moment would decide the fate of Willow Creek. The dust settled momentarily, as if even the wind held its breath for what was about to unfold. Jasper Hayes stood tall, his weathered features resolute. Across from him, Blackjack radiated barely contained fury, his hand twitching near the butt of his revolver. "You think you can stop me?" Blackjack growled, his voice dripping with venom. "An old man like you standing alone against me and my boys? You'll regret this." Jasper tilted his head slightly, his lips curling into a faint, confident smirk. "You've got it wrong, son. I'm not standing alone." Behind Jasper, the townsfolk's resolve burned bright. Sarah and Evan manned their posts, providing cover fire as Grady and others moved to fortify their positions. The sound of their unity, the click of reloading guns, the steady rhythm of boots on dirt, sent a clear message to the bandits. They weren't going anywhere without a fight. "It's over, Blackjack," Jasper continued, his tone calm but unyielding. "Your men are faltering, and so are you. Cut your losses before this gets worse." Blackjack's sneer faltered for a fraction of a second before he barked out a bitter laugh. "Cut my losses? You think I'll just walk away? You don't know who you're dealing with, old man." Jasper's eyes narrowed. "I know exactly who you are. A bully with a loud bark and no bite. You're used to winning because no one stood up to you, until now." The words struck a nerve. Blackjack's face twisted with anger, and he raised his revolver in a swift, practiced motion. But Jasper was faster. In one fluid movement, Jasper unslung his rifle and fired. The shot wasn't aimed to kill, but to disarm. Blackjack's revolver flew from his hand, landing in the dirt several feet away. The outlaw staggered back, clutching his wrist with a mix of pain and shock. You shot me," Blackjack stammered, his bravado crumbling. Jasper stepped forward, his boots crunching against the dirt. "I told you it was over. You're the one who didn't listen." The remaining bandits hesitated, their eyes darting between Blackjack and the unyielding townsfolk. The confidence that had fueled their rampage evaporated, replaced by fear and uncertainty. Evan seized the moment, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Look around you," he shouted. "You've lost. Leave while you still can, or end up like the rest." The gang wavered, and then, one by one, they began to retreat. Some dropped their weapons and bolted on foot, while others scrambled onto their horses. The once imposing gang was reduced to a scattering of desperate men fleeing for their lives. Blackjack, still clutching his wrist, glared at Jasper with unfiltered hatred. "You think you've won? This isn't over." Jasper leveled his rifle, his expression hard as stone. "So it is over, and if you ever show your face here again, it'll be the last mistake you make." For a moment it seemed as though Blackjack might argue, but then his shoulders sagged, and he turned, trudging toward his horse. The weight of his defeat hung heavy in the air as he mounted and rode off without looking back. As the last of the gang disappeared into the distance, a heavy silence settled over Willow Creek. The townsfolk slowly emerged from their barricades, their faces etched with exhaustion and relief. Grady approached Jasper, his hand outstretched. "We did it," the sheriff said, his voice thick with emotion. "Thanks to you." Jasper shook his head. "You did it, Grady. All of you. I just gave you a push in the right direction." Nearby, Sarah embraced Evan, her composure finally breaking. "We stood up to them," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "We actually did it." Evan held her close, his voice steady. "Because we had you. Because we had Jasper. And because we're stronger together than they ever expected." Jasper walked among the townsfolk, offering quiet words of encouragement and gratitude. For the first time in years, the people of Willow Creek felt a sense of pride and unity. They had faced their greatest fear and emerged victorious. Eleanor, the schoolteacher, approached Jasper with her young son in tow. The boy stared up at him with wide eyes, clutching a toy rifle. "Mr. Hayes," Eleanor said softly, "you've given this town more than just safety. You've given us hope." Jasper knelt to the boy's level, a rare softness in his expression. "Hope's a powerful thing, son. Don't let anyone take it from you." As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting the town in warm golden hues, Jasper found himself standing alone at the edge of the main street. The events of the day weighed heavily on him, but so did the knowledge that he had made a difference. Evan joined him, his steps light but deliberate. "You're leaving, aren't you?" Jasper nodded. "My work here's done. You don't need me anymore." Evan frowned. "This town will always need people like you." Jasper's gaze remained fixed on the horizon. "It's not about needing me. It's about realizing you've had the strength all along." The golden hues of the setting sun stretched across Willow Creek, painting the dirt streets and wooden buildings in a warm, amber glow. The calm that followed the storm was palpable, yet the tension lingered in the air like the fading smoke of a distant fire. The townsfolk were still reeling from their victory, their expressions a mix of relief and exhaustion. Jasper Hayes stood at the center of it all, his rifle resting against his shoulder. Though his posture was relaxed, his eyes remained sharp, scanning the horizon for any sign of the bandits. Experience had taught him to never let his guard down too soon. Grady approached, his badge glinting in the fading sunlight. He removed his hat, running a hand through his sweat-soaked hair. "They're gone," he said, his voice heavy with gratitude. "But I can't shake the feeling they might come back." Jasper nodded, his expression unreadable. "They might. Men like Blackjack don't take kindly to losing. But if they do, you'll be ready." Grady hesitated, glancing at the townsfolk who were beginning to regroup and rebuild. "We couldn't have done this without you. How can we repay you?" Jasper offered a faint smile, his weathered face softening. "You don't owe me anything, Grady. Just keep this town safe and look out for one another. That's payment enough." As Grady stepped away to address the crowd, Sarah and Evan approached Jasper. Sarah's face was streaked with dirt and sweat, but her eyes shone with determination. "We stood up to them," she said, her voice filled with quiet pride. "But it was because of you. You gave us the courage to fight." Jasper shook his head. The courage was already there, Sarah. All I did was remind you of it. Evan nodded, his jaw set with newfound resolve. You showed us what we're capable of. We won't forget that. The townsfolk gathered near the saloon, their faces lit with a mixture of triumph and weariness. Grady addressed them, his voice carrying over the murmurs. Today, we proved something to ourselves and to anyone who dares to challenge us. Willow Creek isn't a place to be pushed around. Not anymore. The crowd erupted into cheers, their voices echoing through the town. For the first time in years, the people of Willow Creek felt a sense of unity and strength. They had faced their fears and emerged stronger. Jasper lingered on the outskirts, watching the celebration with a quiet satisfaction. He knew this was their victory, not his. His work here was done, and it was time to move on. As he turned to leave, Eleanor, the schoolteacher, approached with her young son. "Mr. Hayes," she said softly, her voice tinged with emotion. "You've done more for this town than we can ever repay. Thank you." Jasper knelt to the boy's level, his eyes kind. "Take care of your mama, kid. And remember, being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you do what's right, even when you are." The boy nodded solemnly, clutching his toy rifle as if it were a real one. Jasper ruffled his hair and stood, tipping his hat to Eleanor before walking toward the edge of town. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting the town in shadow. Jasper's silhouette blended with the darkening landscape as he made his way to his horse, his boots crunching softly against the dirt. He mounted with practiced ease, the creak of the saddle the only sound in the still evening air. As he rode out of Willow Creek, Jasper glanced back one last time. The town was a beacon of light against the encroaching darkness, a testament to the strength and resilience of its people. He knew they would be fine without him. They had found their courage, and they would stand strong against whatever challenges lay ahead. The cold night settled over the plains as Jasper rode under a blanket of stars, the distant howl of coyotes punctuating the stillness. He had hoped to leave Willow Creek in peace, but his instincts kept him vigilant. He knew the likes of Blackjack wouldn't retreat quietly, not after a humiliating defeat. Sure enough, a distant thundering of hooves shattered the calm. Jasper pulled his horse to a halt, his sharp gaze scanning the horizon. Against the moonlit backdrop, dark figures emerged, their silhouettes unmistakable. The bandits had returned, and this time, they had brought reinforcements. Jasper dismounted and tied his horse to a nearby tree, positioning himself strategically behind a cluster of boulders. He checked his rifle, its weight familiar and reassuring in his hands. The faint jingle of spurs and low voices grew louder, the bandits unaware they were riding straight into the sights of a seasoned sharpshooter. Blackjack's voice carried through the night. "You really thought you could humiliate us and walk away, Hayes? We're taking you down tonight, and then we're burning that town to the ground." Jasper remained silent, his focus narrowing on the approaching group. He counted 8 men in total, each armed and dangerous. A younger man might have been intimidated, but Jasper had faced far worse in his lifetime. The first shot rang out like a thunderclap, cutting through the still night air. One of the bandits fell from his horse before he even realized what had hit him. The others scattered, shouting in confusion. Jasper shifted positions, his movements silent and calculated. He fired again, and another man went down. "Spread out!" Blackjack roared, his bravado masking his unease. "Find him!" The bandits dismounted, their footsteps crunching against the dry grass as they fanned out in search of their unseen adversary. Jasper used their disarray to his advantage, picking them off one by one. Each shot was precise, each target chosen with care. He moved like a ghost, his knowledge of the terrain and tactical precision turning the dark field into his battlefield. As the numbers dwindled, Blackjack's frustration turned to desperation. "Face me, Hayes!" he bellowed, his voice echoing across the plains. "Stop hiding and fight like a man!" Jasper emerged from the shadows, his rifle slung over his shoulder. He carried himself with a calm confidence that unnerved Blackjack. "You sure about that?" Jasper asked, his voice low and steady. "Because from where I'm standing, it doesn't look like you're winning." Blackjack drew his pistol, but Jasper was faster. In one fluid motion, he raised his rifle and fired, the bullet striking the gun cleanly from Blackjack's hand. The outlaw froze, clutching his stinging fingers as the weapon clattered to the ground. The 2 men stood facing each other, the tension thick in the air. "You've lost," Jasper said, his tone laced with finality. "Take what's left of your men and get out of here. If I ever see you near Willow Creek again, You won't get a second chance." For a moment, it seemed Blackjack might challenge him. His jaw tightened, his eyes blazing with fury. But as he glanced around at the scattered bodies of his men and the implacable resolve in Jasper's eyes, he knew the fight was over. "You'll regret this," Blackjack spat, his voice filled with venom. "Try one day, someone's gonna take you down." Jasper stepped closer, his gaze unflinching. "Maybe, but it won't be you." Defeated, Blackjack turned and mounted his horse, his remaining men following suit. Jasper watched them disappear into the night, their shadows swallowed by the darkness. He stood there for a moment, letting the adrenaline fade before returning to his horse. As the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, Jasper rode back toward Willow Creek. The town was still quiet, the events of the previous day etched into its bones. He didn't stop to speak with anyone. He simply rode through, tipping his hat to Grady, who stood on the porch of the sheriff's office. Grady raised a hand in farewell, his expression a mix of gratitude and respect. He didn't need to say anything. Both men understood what had been accomplished and what it meant for the future of the town. Jasper continued on, the warmth of the rising sun on his back. He knew his journey wasn't over. There would always be another town, another fight, another group of people in need of help. But for now, he carried with him the satisfaction of a battle well fought and a community given the chance to reclaim its strength. The echoes of gunfire and the weight of loss would stay with him, as they always did. But so too would the quiet moments of victory. The knowledge that even in the face of chaos, a single act of courage could change everything. The warm light of the new day painted the plains in hues of gold and amber as Jasper Hayes rode into the horizon. The events of the past day replayed in his mind, not as a source of pride, but as a reminder of the burden he carried. Each choice he made, each shot fired, was another step in a life defined by necessity rather than desire. For Jasper, heroism wasn't a title. It was a responsibility he never sought but couldn't abandon. Willow Creek began to stir as the sun climbed higher. Doors creaked open, and the townsfolk stepped out cautiously, their eyes scanning the streets for signs of trouble. What they found instead was peace, a rare and fragile commodity in a place so often touched by violence. Grady stood on the sheriff's porch, surveying the town with a quiet sense of accomplishment. He had witnessed something extraordinary in Jasper, a man whose quiet strength had done more to protect the town in a day than years of law enforcement ever could. Inside the general store, Alice shared the morning's gossip with her customers, her voice tinged with awe. "He didn't even ask for thanks," she said, shaking her head. "Just got on his horse and rode off like it was nothing." Across the street, young Billy sat on the edge of the fountain, recounting the story to anyone who would listen. "He didn't even flinch," the boy said, his eyes wide with admiration. Those outlaws didn't stand a chance. In the hearts of Willow Creek's residents, Jasper Hayes had become a legend. His deeds would be recounted in whispers and tales for years to come. A man who showed them that strength didn't need to be loud, and that even the quietest among them could be a force to reckon with. Farther down the trail, Jasper stopped at a small grove of trees. He dismounted and let his horse graze while he sat beneath the shade of an old oak. The quiet was soothing, a stark contrast to the chaos of the day before. He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a worn photograph, a black and white image of his wife and son. Their smiles were frozen in time, a bittersweet reminder of everything he had lost and everything that kept him moving forward. As he sat there, Jasper allowed himself a rare moment of reflection. He had lived a life defined by violence, but it was moments like this, moments where he could help others find peace, that gave him purpose. He knew his journey was far from over. There would always be another town, another fight, and another chance to stand up for those who couldn't stand up for themselves. Back in Willow Creek, the sheriff's office received a telegram from a neighboring town. Word of Jasper's confrontation with Blackjack and his men had spread, and the message was clear. The Chrome Demons had disbanded. Their grip on the region was broken, thanks to one man's unwavering resolve. Grady smiled as he read the message, knowing that Willow Creek was safer now than it had been in years. As the town settled into its new rhythm, Jasper mounted his horse and continued on his way. He didn't know where the road would lead him next, but he trusted that when the time came, he'd know what to do. His shadow stretched long across the ground as the sun climbed higher, a solitary figure moving forward with quiet determination. Stories like Jasper's remind us that true strength comes not from loud boasts or flashy gestures, but from quiet resolve and unyielding principles. His actions proved that even one person can make a difference. no matter how insurmountable the odds might seem. If this tale of courage and resilience resonated with you, make sure to subscribe to our channel. We bring you stories of ordinary people doing extraordinary things, showcasing the power of determination, bravery, and the human spirit. Don't stop here. Click on the next video to explore another unforgettable story of heroism and hope. Let's continue this journey together, celebrating the moments that inspire and the people who remind us what it means to truly live with purpose.